The two topics that we are hoping to cover today, as Shannon mentioned, are public communication in STEM and girls in STEM. And so really why we chose these two topics is that we find in our field, we do a lot of work working with businesses, working with university professors, and trying to get them more comfortable with talking to the public about these topics in a way that helps the public become part of the discussion rather than that sort of one-way communication that often occurs when people are sometimes talking above the heads of their audience. And then Glenna is going to, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that public communication, and then Glenna is going to get into talking a little bit about the specific ways we can help support girls in STEM, because there are some unique challenges that a lot girls face when entering into STEM fields. All right, so who are we? So both Glenna and I work at the C Science Center, which is located in Manchester's Mill Yard. Glenna has been an educator here at C for 13 years. She works pretty much with all age groups, but she has a specialty in children ages 2 to 6, so those early learners, and really getting those young ones engaged very, very quickly in STEM topics. And then I'm the executive director at C Science Center. I've been at the center since June of last year, but I have about 20 years of experience working in informal science settings and in science museums. So for those of you who haven't been to the C Science Center, we're just going to give you a little bit of an overview about what we are, who we are, what we do. So we are an interactive, hands-on science center, which means when we are engaging with the public, one of the ways we do this is through getting them to actively become involved in the science and technology topics. So we get the kids engaged and their parents by doing, for the most part. So we will have people physically doing activities and experiments or participating in those activities in a sort of back and forth way. So we tend to avoid, again, that sort of lecture style. We like to engage back and forth with our audiences. We are informal educators. So I know a lot of people might not be familiar with this term, but informal educators are basically anyone who does education outside of that sort of structured school curriculum. So as informal educators, we are really looking to break free of those sort of rigid topic barriers that you might get in a classroom and sort of follow the learner where they are interested and where we can do the most benefit. So we are STEM educators here at C. We tend to focus on science and innovation as the part of STEM that we really focus most of our efforts on, and with the innovation, the sort of creativity that's involved in a lot of science, technology, engineering, and math topics. We really focus on children and their families. We serve about 45,000 visitors yearly during normal years. Obviously, the last couple of years have been a little interesting, but we also serve a lot of students through school programs. So these can be in-person outreach programs where we go to a school. They could be programs where we're doing a virtual presentation or demonstration or a kit with the students where they have materials on their end. But we, even during this pandemic, those numbers have actually increased a bit, and we're serving quite a lot of students through those school programs. All right, so why is this topic important? Because everyone in this room is an informal STEM educator, whether you realize it or not, because most education about science, technology, engineering, and math occurs in informal settings when you're talking with friends, when, you know, as a parent, you're talking to a child or a cousin or a niece or nephew, when you're talking to, you know, your grandparents, your parents about topics or what you're doing. And coming up really soon, we've got Thanksgiving, you're going to be talking to a lot of relatives and friends who might not know much about your subject area or field. And you might be the only interaction they have with science and technology topics. That's not something that comes off of a news clip. So why does science and communication matter? This is a little bit of one of those scary slides, but I think this past year has hit home about why it's so important to be clear about science and technology topics and also how we are communicating them. I think a lot of people are getting their information about science and technology from news cycles, and news cycles tend to deliver information in ways that doesn't necessarily follow the best scientific process or practice. So we might hear very scary statistics, things are going to be sensationalized, and it causes a lot of confusion for the public, especially for a public who may not be as familiar with what a clinical study is or how we learn through science through mistakes and tests and retrials. So again, this is has been a crazy year, but it has really shown just how much this sort of confusion about how science works and how science progresses can really impact people's lives in a major way. All right, so this is the first area we're going to dive into, is understanding your audience and who you are talking to. I think this is one of the areas as a science educator where we find that people tend to really take the largest missteps when they start conversations. Because for the most part, a lot of folks get really excited about what they're talking about and what they do, and they just start automatically talking at a level that they don't even know if the other individual is at or understands. So what do I mean by that? Most of us spend the majority of our days, 8 to 12 hours, working with and around people who also have specialized knowledge in our field. Those might be customers, they might be your colleagues, they might be, vendors, and those folks are all pretty in tune to at least a base level of what you're doing in your business day to day. And what happens is we're so used to talking at that, like two individuals who share a certain base level of knowledge, that when we go to talk to someone who might not be as versed, we might start falling into the jargon trap. And what happens then is generally you will start seeing the person nod, smile, but you won't get a lot of feedback. And a lot of what can occur is that you might not have taken the time to understand what the person knows and what they're interested in. And especially with STEM topics, there can be a lot of intimidation and embarrassment if someone doesn't exactly know what you're talking about or understand a word. Now, we see this with children, but we actually see this even more heavily with adults. So adults are usually more embarrassed to admit they don't know something than a child is. So often, if you start falling into jargon of your field or start entering a topic and discussing that topic at a level that's too high for your audience, you're going to end up getting the nod, and the person is just going to sort of smile and try not to embarrass themselves in the conversation and be focused on that, rather than on getting into really critically thinking about what you're saying and asking questions and getting engaged with the topic. So one of the things we always like to remind people of is think about the words you're using, and are these helpful vocabulary or is it jargon? Is there a better way to explain what you're saying using terms that that person's going to understand? And also making sure not to assume that you know what the individual talking to already knows and what their baseline is. The best way to start one of these conversations is to really go back and forth with that person and sort of ask them, oh, well, this is the field I work in. What do you know about that? And start asking them questions so that you can sort of establish, what level should I be talking about? Should I be getting into, talking about nuclear physics, or should I be talking about, very baseline information about general overview concepts? And then the last thing is sort of developing the hook. So a lot of folks here, I think, are in marketing communications who know this pretty well, but like, why would somebody be interested in the topic you're talking about, and why would it be important to them? In these conversations, we need to make sure that we are taking into consideration I always like to say that you have empathy for the learner. So you want to meet them where they're at. You want to meet them with what they're interested in, and make sure that what you're talking about isn't just something that's of interest to you and that you think they should know, but it's something that they are actually interested in learning about. So following on that, really learning about what matters to people. There's a couple of things that we use, techniques we use here at the Science Center, which can really be good tools for others to use as they're communicating to the public outside. So the things we do at the Science Center is we make sure that all learning experiences are free choice. So when you're having a communication with your neighbor, when you are talking to the general public, unlike in a school environment where someone is going to be sitting down and probably going to get tested on whatever you're talking about at a later date, in a free choice environment, which is where all informal science education happens, the user has the ability to tune you out if they're not interested. So you really have to look at how you are discussing things and make sure that the learner is able to direct the conversation. So it's not about what you want to tell them, it's about where they want to go and what they want to learn. The second big part that we really focus on is personal connections. So there's learning that takes place during the actual discussion, but then there's learning that's going to take place after that discussion. So I think all of you have had this, and one of the things I always love to ask audiences is think about that time where you had what we call, say, a museum moment, or one of those really strong memories where you did something and, you know, year, 2 years later, you can still remember back and you're like, oh yeah, I remember doing this and this is what I did. It was just like one of those moments that stuck in your memory, and you continually sort of go back to that, and then you sort of have that baseline that you continue to build and learn on top of. So for example, I know when I was little, my parents took me to see the mummies at my state museum back where I grew up in New York, and I was probably 10, but I ended up studying archaeology for about 6 years, went to college for it, because I remember going to the museum, seeing the mummies, and just being so interested in it and wanting to learn more and more and more and more and more. So as you're having these discussions with people, think about those personal connections where, you're sort of getting into the topics where people are really interested, and letting the conversation flow towards what they're interested in, things that relate back to them, so that they will talk about it at the dinner table and sort of reinforce those memories so that it can continue coming back and being built upon. And then the third thing is real world connections. So this is the so what. So what does this mean in your actual life? This picture I have here on this slide shows one of our educators who's actually doing an activity on regenerative medicine. And you can see the age of these girls. We're able to broach this topic with really young girls because we're able to approach it in a way where we can talk about, oh, has anyone in your family ever had a transplant? And we start making those connections so they can tie it back into their life and talk about their personal stories. And then we jump off from those personal stories and real world connections into talking about the science. And then we cement the memory so that they can keep building off of that experience. So now you got sort of a base understanding. We're getting into the conversation. So when you actually start having the conversation, this is another one of these areas where I feel like people can fall into either talking over or not fully understanding where the learner is at. So one of the big things I always like to tell people about is that learning is about concepts, not about facts. So I'm sure a lot of you read through the paper, you listen to the radio, you're learning, facts are getting spit at you every day. But a lot of those facts, although they are facts, can be misleading depending on if you don't understand how some of those numbers and statistics were developed. So what is more important in science communication is often the concepts and processes. So trying to get people to understand how, say, a clinical trial might work versus the specifics of a particular clinical trial is going to serve them much better in understanding things in the future. Because again, it's very easy for facts to be presented in ways that can be misleading or confusing. And it is also very easy to get so caught up in the facts that the learner is not going to be able to sort of translate what they have learned into a new situation. So what we always try to do as we're educating kids and as their parents as well and adults that we work with is before we start going into those conversations, we think about those larger concepts. And if we were to have, say, in our conversation, what are the 2-3 things we want people to walk away understanding versus specific information? So this is, again, a big difference between, that formal education and informal education is instead of trying to get people to memorize things like dates and specific statistics, we're really focusing on what are those base concepts of how the scientific process works, or how larger systems work within science that are going to get the learner to be able to use that model in a new setting. So they have that sort of base scientific literacy. The next thing to consider as you're having these conversations is oversimplification. So one of the challenges of a lot of science topics is they are very complicated. And I think of 2 examples off the top of my head where we often see lots of oversimplification to the point of sort of creating a misunderstanding. I know a lot of you probably were taught about the Lamarckian concepts of evolution in school, and it can be very easy to say, yep, the giraffe wanted to get to the higher branches, so therefore it grew the long neck, and really simplifying it so much that then someone thinks that an animal can actually be an active participant in their evolution versus a natural selection model. So again, thinking about the words we're using and making sure sometimes it's a good idea to practice a little bit beforehand so that you don't end up oversimplifying to the point where you're actually creating misconceptions for the end learner. Another area where I've seen this happen quite a lot is in talking about engineering topics. So in engineering, we're always talking about forces and what forces are acting on a particular object. And generally, there are so many different forces acting that it can be very misleading when you say, talking about a bridge that, yep, we have downward forces coming from gravity, but there are so many other things happening. So making sure that when you're talking, you leave that wiggle room in there, and just plainly say something like, there are many different forces, but we're going to talk about one of the bigger ones, so that people know that, yes, it's more complicated, but we're going to cover a little part of this, and that's okay. I think another thing with the oversimplification is just feeling comfortable with saying when you don't know something is sort of huge when you're communicating science. I think a lot of folks get into the situation where they might be trying to for the first time break a topic down into into the right level for their learner, and what they actually end up doing is, because it takes some time and some practice to try to simplify and make sure that you don't build any misunderstandings, that they'll instead of just saying, oh, I'm not sure exactly how to explain this, let me think about it, they'll try to explain it sort of off the cuff. And sometimes it's just better to say, I'm not sure, or I'm going to think about it a little bit and I'll find a good way to explain that. And that is probably one of the better ways you could deal with those situations if you ever get into the case where you are having trouble trying to simplify the topic you're talking about. And then finally is misconceptions. So misconceptions, often if you haven't spent the time really talking and learning where the individual you're talking to is coming from, and you don't understand what misconceptions they have, you can maybe start talking at a place where you're actually reinforcing the misconceptions rather than eliminating them. So this one comes back again to really asking questions of the person who you're talking to and making sure that they really both understand where you're starting from, or if they don't, that you are going back a step further to make sure that you're starting at a point where you can talk them through some of those misconceptions. And we often find with children, you'll have misconception reinforcement. I would say with adults, one of the things that we find is, and I think today's climate is a good example of it, that misconceptions can tend to lead to people digging in their heels, depending on how you approach that. Nobody likes to feel like they are ill-informed or stupid. Like everyone, those misconceptions are often not because the person doesn't want to learn, it's because they truly just misunderstood something. And especially when you're dealing with adults, you want to be careful with how you approach those misconceptions to make sure that you're having a discussion with them and not sort of coming up and saying, well, that's not right. That you're really sort of talking through, oh, why do you think that way? And sort of having more of a discussion rather than sort of telling them from a seat of authority that, no, this is the right way. Because you will end up, especially with the adults, getting a lot of pushback and sometimes having a lot of trouble entering into the conversation more deeply if you don't, if you're not sensitive to the fact that no one likes to feel like they misunderstood something. All right, so we're going to move on to Glenna.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Get myself in order here. So I'm going to pull up my screen so I can share that with you as well. All right, so Shana, can you see that okay?
Not yet.
Okay, so let's figure out what's going on. And there we go. Mm-hmm. Oh, all right, I'm going to try this again. All right, give me 1 second.
You did just have it, Glenna. You just needed to put it into presentation mode. We were able to see it.
Okay, hold on 1
So
sec.
just go back to what you did and then just put it in presenter mode.
So while Glenna is getting set up, one of the things she put in the chat was we'd love to hear from folks. If folks can put in the Q&A, just how have you in the past tried to work through understanding the sort of level of the learner? And do any of you have stories? I know we're coming up on Thanksgiving where a lot of communication and miscommunication happens. Do any of you have stories or thoughts about areas or challenges that you have had with trying to talk to particular individuals about science topics, and what were they?
Why is this not working?
Do you want me to pull it up?
Yeah, it's not working. I don't know why I can't get it to work. It was working yesterday, and now it's not.
All right.
Shana, your screen is just white.
It's
We just
white.
see white. Yep.
Okay. Let me try one more time.
Here we go.
All right. Everybody see it now?
Yes. Yes, I can see now. Perfect. All right. So a few different topics that I'm going to touch on today. One of them is going to be about gender norms, and then we're going to move on to tween drop-off, representation, and just kind of talking a little bit about having lives outside of work. As Shana had mentioned earlier, my job here is the Education and Programs Coordinator. So kind of like on the front lines of the informal education here, whether it's on-site, off-site, virtual, many different things, many different avenues, many different hats. One program that we started, actually, it's about a year and a half ago now, is our early learners program, which is our Storytime Science, which kind of hits that age group from ages 2 to 6. And what it's done for me is it's really given me a really big eye opener as to the need for this type of programming in our community, as well as a better understanding of what is needed with these programs. Sorry, there's a big cart going by. Got my attention. So one of the things that that I've noticed is, or come across, is when we talk about gender norms. And if we think about it, like, what are our traditional gender roles? You know, what do we think of when we think of them? Well, when we think of gender roles, typically there are roles that would be associated with either a boy or a girl. A gender role, by definition, is a social role that encompasses a range of behaviors or attitudes that are generally considered acceptable or appropriate. And very often those start at home. And, you know, what is okay for a girl to do, what is okay for a boy to do. And that is then carried on to in both the informal and the formal education world, as well as just society as a whole. When we can advocate for positive gender roles and avoid those harmful stereotypes that come across with them, with girls in society, we can play a more proactive role in challenging those social norms. So if you were to look at the slide I have up on the screen in front of you, you can see that we have a picture of two different play settings. We know that free play is very, very important in the development of a young child, all children, but especially in the young early learners. And we have a pink kitchen with just a picture of a little girl. And then next to it, we have a tool center with just pictures of little boys. And, you know, things that we try and avoid and get around or more normalize is that it's quite okay for both genders to play with both things, to not only that it is okay, but to normalize it, to make it okay. So here at the Science Center, we wouldn't necessarily represent this with just a picture of a girl. It would be a picture of a boy and a girl playing with a pink or a blue kitchen, or a pink or a blue tool set. You know, there are traditional words that we think of when we think of gender stereotypes. Words that these young learners are hearing for very early age, when it comes to being, you know, a female or feminine, not, you know, that they're non-aggressive, they're passive, they're home-oriented, they're indecisive, they can be talkative, they're nurturing, whereas typical masculine or boys descriptive words might be they're aggressive, they're dominant, they're decisive, Maybe they don't talk as much. They're analytical. They have more analytical brains. They're non-nurturing. And even at that very, very early age, even if they're not understanding those words, they can associate things just by the use of color. So, colors associated with a more feminine gender role, pink, pastel colors, things associated with, a male with blues, primary colors. We can go even a little bit further onto talking about very specific types of toys that are even introduced at earlier ages. Kitchen, dolls, utensils of that manner, of the nurturing roles, are very typically associated with a female. Tools, trucks, anything kind of rough and rugged is, kind of sent into a boy role. And what we would like to do, and what we're trying to do, is to make it more of a normal thing for an equalization across the board, where it does not matter. You can play with what you like, because that early based free learning is what is going to then roll over as they go about into their education, into their elementary, into their secondary, and then into their roles and their journeys that they're going to take throughout their lives and what they choose as a career. Girls are systematically pushed away, inadvertently and not so inadvertently at times, from STEM throughout their education. They have limited their training and their options to go into these fields as adults. STEM fields are often viewed as and are still viewed and are a male-dominated field. And they're often viewed as masculine. And that starts from the home, and then first and foremost, and then onto teachers and parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, grandfathers, without us even realizing that we're doing it. People will often group young preschoolers in what they seem as an appropriate toy or appropriate experiment or appropriate colors or appropriate language or jargon or for them to use. And so having that representation that it is okay to, do what is interesting to you and make it more normal for them to see the role models in their life acting that way and presenting it that way makes it easy, more normal for them, and they'll grow up in that environment instead of having that predetermined stereotype. Here at C, like I said, Shana had mentioned earlier, and I mentioned having a big forte with the very young early learners. One of the programs that I do, again, is called Storytime Science. And the kids come in with their parents, and we read a story, and we do an activity. Things that I have picked up and noticed is that, you'll get some of these very early age children, and as early as 2, 3, 4 years old, and they're very still already have those, they want certain things, certain colors, certain activities. They don't want to do a certain thing, or more so you see the parents kind of shying away from it a little bit. And it's almost like you see the parents taking a lead from their children. Oh, are you sure you want to use that color? Are you sure? Don't you want to use this color? And then kind of seeing them evolve as we go and say, it's okay. It's okay if they want to use pink. It's okay if they want to use blue. It's okay if they want to make a kite that has pink and blue streamers. It's totally fine. And just making it normal for them. And having that normalization for them is going to then fester over throughout their life, actually, in their careers.
So Glenna, I have one question here for you. So we often see that some parents tend to freak out and say they have a little girl and will not want to get her anything pink or be horrified if she is interested in something that's some of the more traditional sort of gender norm. How have you sort of talked with those parents, or how would you address that type of issue where a parent is just concerned, like, and worried about sort of continuing gender stereotypes?
You know, sometimes I feel like it's I'm trying to think of how I can answer this. I don't want to say that it's a fine line that you don't want to cross here in our informal setting. But the way that I would handle it, the way I have handled it, is to just make it okay. It's completely okay. And I will ask the kids what they want. What color do you like? What's your favorite color? And I will say, well, my favorite color is blue. Well, I'm a girl, but my favorite color is blue, and I like blues. I like dark colors. And just kind of making that known to the parents that it's okay. We have a great exhibit here. We have a great exhibit here that is a kitchen/lab combination. So part of it's the kitchen, part of it is a lab, and it is all gender neutral colors. It is not specific like pastel colors. It's all gender. And it's sometimes great to just kind of go and sit. And I have done this after I have been with the kids in the program, and I'll go and sit with the parents and watch the kids play, and just kind of open up that communication with the parents and be like, look what they're doing. Do you see what they're doing? Isn't that neat how their brains work? And try and refocus the conversation from being concerned about, oh, well, why is my child only wanting, I only want them to do this, or I only want them to do that. But to open up that topic, that conversation with them of, wow, look at how their brain is working. Do you see how they're doing that? Do you see how they're taking that and doing that with it? Isn't that kind of neat? Isn't that kind of cool? Why do you think they thought of that? And just kind of switching their thought process from one thing to another. And when you do that, it can open up a whole different viewpoint that they're maybe not seeing before.
Yeah, I think like one of the things I was going to say that I noticed a lot with the lab is when you can sit down with those parents and have those conversations when, one of the child does pick up, a measuring cup for, a baking measuring cup. And then you can be like, oh, look, they're doing measuring just like they would be doing in a lab, and like really talking about the connections there, that the STEM that's happening in some of those more domestic settings as well, and saying, look, they are doing STEM.
Absolutely. So just kind of, one thing that I have come across, and this kind of goes over into many different topics, not just in gender, is that parents can often be intimidated on how to teach STEM to very early children, very early learners. They are very intimidated by it. We've used that word today a few times. They don't know how. They don't know how to introduce these topics to their very young children. And one of the things that I just try and reinforce and get across is let them take the lead. Let them show you, we'll give you the tools and show you that it's easy to introduce STEM. It's in everything that we do, every part of our life, it's in there. But to just let them take the lead, follow their lead. Instead of having them follow your lead, you follow their lead. Don't tell them what to play with or how to play with something, but sit back and watch them and let them play with it. Let them figure out how to use it and take the lead from them. And when you do that, you end up kind of getting a big more realization as to how their brains are working. And it's actually very cool to see. It's a whole different topic, but again, we can go off topic and I can get very passionate about that. So then we can move on to our next topic, which is tween drop-off, which is something that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. Young girls can be very typically have an interest in STEM, and doing a lot of research on this for this presentation, because again, it's not typically something that I would be presenting on. So I've learned a lot myself as well. And some of the numbers that I've come across have been a little bit alarming as well. Girls would typically get an interest in STEM related activities and be really interested around, in that 9 to 10, 11-year-old mark, but then they lose it again by the time they're 15. And the big question is why? Where is it going wrong? Why do they have such an interest? And then all of a sudden, not so much of an interest anymore. And then there's this huge drop off in that age group. And we have to ask ourselves, what is going on that is causing that to happen? Studies have shown that there is a few different things going on, that there is a lack of female role models in STEM-based careers. There is, on average, there's less than 30% of the world's researchers in STEM, women in STEM careers. It's less than 30%, which is very, very, very low. Not enough hands-on experience, hands-on experiments for them that they feel like they can participate in. And when we say that they feel like they can participate in, because we know that they can, we know that they can do them. But they are very susceptible at this age to peer pressure, and what we have a fear of failing or not looking smart in front of their friends or in front of their peers, in front of their teachers, in front of their parents. Girls will tend to start pulling back at this age and be like, well, I need to be perfect. And if I'm not going to be perfect, if I'm not going to get it right, then I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to try it. I'd rather sit here quietly and let somebody else look that way than myself look that way. Boys are pushed to take risks. Girls, especially at this age, are taught to think and to assess their risks and to not make, they don't want to do it until they can do it correctly and perfectly. And something that, we should be teaching and instilling upon them is not to fear that failing feeling, that imperfect feeling, but to embrace it. Because being able to go through that process where you don't know how it's going to turn out, or you don't have all the answers, you have to ask a lot of questions, you need help, or maybe the answer is wrong, you give the wrong answer, and that's okay, because working through that, the process that we build up is how to get through that, how to make it better, how to improve upon it. One of the great statements that I found when doing some research on this came from, and you guys all may be familiar with this program, it's called Girls Who Code. And it just really resonated with me, and I just wanted to kind of read it to you guys if you haven't heard it yet, is that the process of learning to, for an example, in the coding, like if girls were learning to code, the process of learning to code is the process of learning to fail. So in order to be able to learn how to do those things, you have to be able to learn how to fail first. And that it's all right. It's all right. It's all right to sit around with that discomfort of not knowing the right answer, of not getting it right the first time, and being okay with it. And then being able to take that and then turn it into, okay, well, what can I do differently? What can I do better? What is the right answer? How can I find out the right answer? Where can I get this information from? And providing them the tools to be able to do that instead of just quitting and giving up because they don't know. And encouraging these girls, encouraging them starts at home and in school. Providing them with the tools that they would need to work through these processes on their own. It's important to not just have female role models. We talk a lot about female role models here, but it's also important to have important male role models, whether it's your dad or your brother, your grandfather, uncles, your male teachers who don't coddle the girls, who don't say, oh, that's okay, you don't know the answer, we'll let someone else figure it out. But that you encourage them to try new things, to reach out of your comfort zone, even if you're not good at it. And connecting STEM subjects to real world people and problems. Finding stuff that they're interested in and then making it relatable to them. You know, I have children, I have 4, they're adults now, but I have 2 girls and 2 boys. So 3 of them are very, very close in age. And it was very interesting dynamic to see what was relatable to one, what was not relatable to the other. Even in the 2 girls who are very close in age together, only a year and 5 days apart, what was relatable to one and what was not relatable to another, and trying to figure out how to take a certain topic and relate it to something in their life that they would then be able to relate to, that they would be able to then go, okay, I see the connection. And then you see their little light bulb go off. They have their aha moment. They get it because you've now related it to something that they can understand. Increasing the number of mentors and role models, especially female ones, that they have access to. We have done some partnerships with local organizations that focus on girls in STEM, Girls at Work, Girls Inc. I'll talk a little bit more about them later when we talk about volunteering. But those programs are programs that focus on girls and really just kind of building them up and allowing them accessibility to be able to thrive in an environment that is comfortable for them.
So Glenna, you're talking a bit about the failure aspects. I know we've talked, and one of the things that Girls at Work and Girls Inc. do really well is they create an environment where girls can fail and feel comfortable and supported about it. But I do feel like this is one of those topics where we see a lot in schools, in the school environment. There's a lot of focus on, learning towards the test and getting the right answers, which, Glenna and I, we've had discussions about this fact that, science and engineering, those are processes that are rooted in failure as part of the learning process, which is sort of different from how it's taught in schools. And this really affects girls quite a lot because sort of these informal settings become so much more important because we are presenting the topics in a way where failure is part of the process and failure is okay, and it can be a good thing because we learn through failing. And so if we want to encourage girls to continue, pursuing STEM, this comfort with failure is a huge part of helping them overcome the hurdle of this tween drop-off where so many girls get discouraged and sort of take that back seat instead of being in there hands-on and doing because they're so nervous about the failure component.
Exactly. And I was just reading the chat when you were saying that. One thing that I do like to say to all the students is if they're here on a program or I'm out there talking to them in an outreach program or camp or whatever informal, just out in the community itself, I ask them to look around. What do you see? What do you feel? What do you touch? What do you hear? And everything in this world is related back to STEM in one way, shape, or form or another. And find what you're passionate about. And it is up to us to help them see that what they're passionate about is going to make it more excitable to them. And therefore, they're going to want to continue in that. If we make it so that they have that failure, that failing feeling, and we don't help them to give them the tools to work through it, then we get that drop off where they just kind of give up. Have them see that, look at situations where they've seen both their fails and their successes. And what was the difference? What did you learn from your failure? And do you see how your failure turned into a success, and be able to have them go through that process, taking their failure, turn it into a success, not just stopping at their failure.
Yeah, we have this term we like to use in the science center field, productive struggle. So, where is it good to run into roadblocks because it helps you learn things more deeply? Because science and engineering, they are processes. It is not about the end facts. It's about the process you use to get to an end result. And really getting people comfortable with failure being a huge part of that process.
I will very often give examples of my own failures, different things that I have done. One thing that I always say when I'm doing a lab or any type of experiment is we do lots of team building activities and different settings, whether it's, in person or however we do them, camp, on-site, off-site. And one of the big things that I'll say is, one of our programs that we have is a Lego racers. The kids are building with Legos. Legos go together very easily. They also come apart very easily. They can drop them, they can break. And I'll say, should we get upset? No. Is it a failure? Absolutely not. Because what are we going to do? We're going to put it back together. And who knows, maybe when we put it back together after this, we'll make it an improvement upon it and we'll make it even better. But I always like to point out things that haven't gone my way and how I have been able to work through them, and that it's completely okay for it to just never work out. And that was okay too. And you may come across things in your life that they were not successes, and it's okay to just learn from them and move on, but you might never actually be able to work, find the answer to that one, but that's okay too. If we move on to our next section, because I think we're running a little bit out of time here, on representation. And I'll just kind of quickly go through the bullet points on this. So equipping our girls and our women with the skills and resources and confidence that they're needed to succeed in STEM. And the word that really, really resonates out to me there is that confidence level. And it's not only just equipping them with that, it's being that example for them. It's being able to confidently stand in front of a group, a classroom of girls who are looking at you going, oh, you're a woman and you're confident. How did you get here? And be able to tell them how I got here and my successes and my failures. Adding more support for young girls to pursue a STEM education by introducing and exposing them to engineering, computer sciences at a very early age, and then continuing to harbor that interest in them. So instead of pushing it back, to bring it forward. Be proactive in implementing changes in our communities and organizations that are around us. This is going to ensure that retention of girls, not just throughout their academic years, but about their whole professional journey. And it's going to hopefully help harbor that, and we'll see a big uptick in the number of women that are now in STEM fields as to what it is now. And then being an advocate for inclusivity, including everybody in the representation of women in these STEM programs. One thing that we can, when we talk about representation, is the physical representation of what we're presenting to these girls as to what it looks like to be in the STEM field. So if you can see in the center photo on here, you just have women standing around in a lab with lab coats on. You look at the surrounding photos and you can see all the different kind of very cool and interesting things that they could be doing. Maybe it's a chef. Maybe it's a computer engineer. Maybe it's a biomedical engineer. Maybe it's not just wearing a lab coat and wearing, funny looking goggles on your face, but really anything. And how we represent that and how we show them that is very, very important for their development. And then we have lives outside of work. This is It's a very easy one. There's a program that in Manchester through the high school, it's called the Quest program. And I go and see them every single year. And it's not so much about doing a science program for them, but it's talking about a career path. How did I get where I am? And it is very, very interesting. And it is for both boys and girls, but it's predominantly girls that are in it. And a lot of questions that have come to me have been, what do you do outside of work? Is this the only thing that you do? And, you know, they're sometimes very surprised when I say, no, I'm a mom. I have 4 kids. I like to go hiking. I jumped out of an airplane. I have a life outside of my work. This is my job. And this is what I do. And I love it and I'm very passionate about it. But you can have both. You can be a mom and be a scientist. You can be married and build a bridge. You can have that whole total package. It's not one or the other.
All right, so we're wrapping it up, but just a couple of things to leave you guys with, because now the so what is how you can actually get involved in making a difference in getting more girls encouraged in STEM. So one of the things I always say is start by creating your elevator pitch for a 2-year-old. And what this means is, you know, we're used to creating elevator pitches for, you know, talking about ourselves and our careers, but usually to people our own age and maybe who are in our same field. Think about what that elevator pitch might look like to talk to someone who is starting off from a different grade point. So, for example, I had a program where I was working with a mycologist who, you know, studied fungus, and we were developing an exhibit for, you know, students in that 2 to 14-year age range. And we brought him out to the floor and said, okay, what we're going to do before we start is we're just going to listen to the kids and ask them questions and just learn what they know. And after an hour session, like, he had started off saying, we're going to talk about the carbon cycle, we're going to talk about this. And after that session, he's like, I know what I have to do. We have to talk about kids about what is a mushroom. And he totally, completely changed about where his starting point is and started redeveloping how he was talking about things, because he learned what the general public actually knew about his field and realized the gap between what he thought they knew and what they actually knew. So think about that. How would you tell a 2-year-old what you did? It's a really great exercise to go through.
Getting involved, volunteering. There's lots of different avenues. I saw one, the STEM coordinator from Girls Inc. We mentioned Girls Inc. We also have Girls at Work. But even if you can't necessarily get involved and volunteer, we have lots of volunteer positions here at the Sea Science Center. Throw that out there. But even if you're, sorry, thought of my job, you know, your level of involvement right now is to just, with the people around you in your own home, to start talking about STEM, start being that good role model, start giving, you know, those good examples, or being a good example, you know, because that's where it's going to start. So it may not be that you can get really big right now in the volunteer. If you can, that's great. But starting small steps make big steps.
Thank you both so much. Really, really appreciate it. Hopefully, everyone got some takeaways on how to communicate the next generation and in your current environment with your coworkers. So appreciate it. We do not have any time for Q&A. We're actually over time, so I apologize for that, everybody. But like I said, I'm leaving the room open afterwards. So if you have time to network or you want to talk with Glenna or Shana, they'll be there. So just double click on the table they're at and pop over and see them. And I just wanted to announce our breakfast for next month. And that is, give me one second here to present it. Hopefully you can see this. So on December 8th, please join us. We have Kate Heeman. She's the CEO and principal of Prelude Solutions. She's going to be talking about setting your organization up for a successful 22 by saving money and improving your technology now. So she's going to be talking about some tips on how to do that. So please join us on December 8th. Thank you, everybody, again. Sorry we're over. Enjoy your day. Next time I see you, you will have just had a Thanksgiving meal, hopefully with your loved ones. And have a great week. And I'll see you all in December. Bye, everybody.